Welcome. As the day draws to a close and the world grows quieter around you, allow your mind to drift. Not forward into dreams just yet, but backward far across time and tide. Before we set sail, if you enjoy these quiet journeys into forgotten history, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep telling these slow, soothing stories, and it lets you join us each time we drift into the past. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Are you winding down at midnight or dozing off just past dusk? We'd love to know. Now, imagine yourself on the creaking wooden deck of a ship, its boards worn smooth by years of booted feet and salt spray. The air is damp, laced with the scent of brine, oil, and something faintly metallic. The sea stretches endlessly in every direction, its vast surface breathing beneath you in slow, rolling swells. Above, a canvas of stars blinks quietly in the cold, clear night. Tonight, we step aboard a 19th century whaling ship, a floating factory, a prison of purpose, and a world of ceaseless labor. This is not the life of a sailor you've seen in adventure tales or paintings of heroic maritime triumphs. This is the dull, exhausting, and frequently miserable life of the ordinary wearer, where sleep was rare, food was questionable, and the ocean was both workplace and grave. Through this journey, we'll not only walk in their heavy boots, but also follow the true story of a ship lost to the sea, uncover the myths that haunted sailors' minds, and explore the lives of those who profited from the peril of others. All told softly, gently, and without haste meant not to thrill, but to ease you into restful sleep, as though rocked by the sea itself. So breathe deeply, let the noise of today fade behind you, and prepare to join the rhythm of lives shaped by salt, wind, and long months without land. Welcome aboard. The smell hits first. You haven't even climbed fully onto the deck, and already something thick settles in your nose. It's the kind of smell that doesn't come and go. It lingers, seeps into your skin, and plants itself behind your eyes. The brine of the sea is there, of course, sharp and salt-laced, but it's overpowered by something darker, richer, older. A pungent mix of tar, wet wood, unwashed bodies, rotting ropes, fish oil, mildew, and something faintly sweet like old meat, long past saving, but still clinging to a memory of usefulness. It's the smell of toil, of years layered atop one another in salt-stained memory. You step aboard the deck. The wood beneath your boots gives slightly old planks, swollen from countless soakings, scarred by the pull of ropes and the weight of barrels. It's sticky in places, slick in others, dry where the sun's managed to reach. There's always something left behind, a trace of blood from the last catch, a smear of tar from the repairs, a scuff from boots that never stop moving. No one greets you with a smile. There is no welcome party. A man with a sun-reddened face and a beard like rope glances your way, then continues tying a knot you've never seen before. Another figure moves a barrel with an economy of effort, a rhythm born not of urgency, but of endless repetition. This is not your first day, not in their eyes. This is your initiation by silence. You are here now, part of the ship. Overhead, the sails creak gently as they shift in the light wind. The masts groan. The ropes sway slightly with the rocking of the vessel. Everything moves, just a little, constantly. You feel it beneath your feet, not just the sea's motion, but the slow pulse of the ship itself, like something alive, a thing that breathes in the fog and exhales labor. Somewhere, out of sight, a bell rings a single chime. You don't yet know what it means, but others react. A shout goes up. Footsteps begin to hurry. You realize time isn't your own anymore. It belongs to the bells, the waves, and the orders shouted down from men whose names you haven't yet heard. And as you stand there, salt stinging your eyes and the strange smell clinging to your breath, it becomes clear this ship is no grand vessel of exploration or glory. It's a floating factory, a machine built of wood and sweat and discipline, set adrift on an endless expanse of water. And now, you're part of it, bunks and bilge water, sleeping in a rolling coffin. Down below the deck, past a narrow hatch that groans as it opens, lies the crew's sleeping quarters, a space so confined, so saturated with years of breath and bodies, that it feels more like a burrow than a room. You descend the wooden steps sideways because there isn't space to go straight. Your shoulders brush the walls, the air thickens with every footfall, and the temperature seems to change cooler, yes, but not refreshing. It's damp and close and strangely heavy. The ceiling is low, so low, in fact, that most men stoop or crawl. The lantern that swings lazily above casts a dim, flickering glow that leaves more shadows than light. It doesn't so much illuminate as it reveals just enough to unsettle. The glint of a rusted nail, the outline of a rat's path, the dark patches where leaks have soaked through the wood again and again. And that smell from above? It's stronger here, amplified, infused with mildew and the slow rot of too many seasons. There are no private spaces, no curtains, no corners, only rows of hammocks strung tightly, side by side, like the ribs of some great sleeping beast, each man's space barely wider than his own body. The canvas sags under the weight of exhaustion. Some are patched with old sailcloth, others stained with salt and sweat and oil that won't ever wash out. If you're new, your hammock hangs near the bilge, the lowest part of the ship, where all things trickle and settle. Water, waste, grease, blood. It collects in a shallow pool and sloshes with the rhythm of the sea. Sometimes it stinks, sometimes it doesn't, but it's always there, a constant presence just beneath your bed. There is no mattress. You sleep wrapped in the scratchy wool of your coat or blanket, if you have one, folded tightly to keep the chill off. But cold has a way of finding skin, especially when the wind howls through cracks in the hull, or when your clothes are still damp from the last watch. You don't undress. There's nowhere to put what you remove, and no guarantee you'll have time to dress again before the next bell. The ship never stops moving. Even in calm waters, it rocks gently, unpredictably. The hammocks swing, not always in sync, bumping into each other like restless sighs in the dark. You hear men snore, groan, mutter. You hear teeth grinding, coughs that never quite clear. You hear the creaking of wood, always stretching, always complaining. The sea never sleeps, and neither, it seems, do you. When storms come, the quarters turn into a chamber of confusion. The pitch and roll become violent, and men strap themselves into their hammocks to keep from being thrown. Others lie awake, fists clenched, eyes wide in the dark, listening for the sound no sailor wants to hear: the splintering of wood, the howl of wind through an open hatch, the sudden, sharp call to brace. But even on calm nights, rest is a relative term. You lie in your hammock, muscles twitching from a day of labor, and your mind does not wander to pleasant dreams. Instead, it counts the hours until your next watch. 4, if you're lucky. 2, if you're not. Sometimes none at all. You adjust to it eventually. Your body learns to sleep in slivers, to doze during meals, to nap during breaks. You sleep like a soldier in a trench, with one eye always open, with ears half listening to the footsteps above, the sound of a rope snapping, or a cry from the lookout. And yet, even this meager rest becomes something you cling to. In those moments when your hammock sways gently, and the sea is calm, and the air holds still, a kind of peace finds you, a rhythm, almost hypnotic, the pulse of the ship and the slow draw of your own breath. You might not dream, but you drift. And in a life of salt and toil, that drifting is as close to comfort as you'll get. Maggoty hardtack and salt pork, eating without taste. There is no dining room, no tablecloth, no silver cutlery. Meals aboard a whaling ship in the 19th century are not taken, they are endured. Food is not an occasion, but a chore, a necessity. Something you get through, not something you enjoy. You eat not to nourish the soul, but simply to keep the body from collapsing under the next round of orders. Meals are served below deck, usually in the same cramped quarters where you sleep, or if the weather is kind and the sea steady perhaps above, sitting on overturned barrels, hunched on the deck, using knees as tables, tin bowls, wooden spoons. Whatever hasn't been lost to the sea, or swallowed by fire, or simply rotted away, nothing matches. Everything smells faintly of salt and smoke. And then there's the hardtack, a biscuit in name only, rectangular, beige, hard as stone. Baked dry to survive months at sea without spoiling, it is closer to brick than bread. You rap it against the table or the wall or your own boot, and it makes a sound more like knocking than tapping. It cracks teeth if you're careless. You never bite directly. You soften it, first soak it in coffee, if any is left, or in water, if it hasn't yet turned green with algae. Even then, it retains a chalky resistance. Some sailors smash it with a hammer or the butt of a knife. Others have learned simply to chew slowly, grimacing all the while. But the worst is when it moves. Tiny, pale weevils, worm-like, wriggling through the floury depths of the biscuit. You see them more clearly when the biscuit's been soaked floating, twitching. Some sailors pick them out, some flick them away. Others don't bother. They're protein, after all. They're part of the meal. Eventually, you stop noticing, or stop caring. Your stomach makes peace with what your mind refuses to dwell on. Then there is the salt pork, a slab of meat that has spent months, sometimes years, packed in barrels of brine. Fatty, gray, slimy with age and wet with its own preservation. Sometimes it smells sour. Sometimes it smells like nothing at all. You learn to cut away the green edges, the soft parts. Boil it until the smell lifts, or the texture improves, or both if you're fortunate. Vegetables? A fading memory. Fruit? A rumor. Fresh bread, butter, milk, those belong to another world. On rare occasions, the cook might break out beans, or a stew made from whatever hasn't gone bad. But these are not rewards. They're variations. Brief pauses in the repetition. The ship's cook is not a chef, but a survivalist. He prepares meals in a galley not much larger than a closet, using fire in a swaying furnace, where everything slides, rattles, and threatens to spill. He works surrounded by barrels, rats, and grease. And still, 3 times a day, you receive your portion. It may not be clean. It may not be warm, but it is there. On deck, the men eat in silence, or speak in mutters. A story told half-heartedly. A joke passed without laughter. The clink of spoons, the scrape of bowls, the ever-present creak of the ship beneath them. No one asks for seconds. No one expects more. Sometimes you dream of food, real food. Not the act of eating, but the smell of a kitchen. A warm loaf. A pot bubbling with something other than lard and salt. These dreams are cruel. They wake you with a hunger that hardtack can never soothe. And so you eat what you're given. You chew what can be chewed. You swallow what must be swallowed. And you thank the cold that dulls your tongue. Because the only thing worse than eating this food is tasting it. Watch and work. Shifts that break the soul. There is no day and night as you once knew them. Time aboard a whaling ship is not marked by sunlight or sleep, but by watches strict, repeating cycles that carve the day into uniform blocks of labor and rest, with little regard for the natural rhythms of the body. 4 hours on duty, 4 hours off, then again and again. A pattern that never ends, that has no beginning and no mercy. The bell is your clock now. It chimes not for beauty or ceremony, but as a command. One bell, two bells, up to 8. Each ring echoes through the ship like a pulse, reminding every man that his time is not his own. When it rings, you move. No questions, no complaints. Fatigue is irrelevant. Hunger is ignored. Even sickness, unless it has brought you to your knees, is set aside. You rise from your hammock, boots half-laced, coat still damp from the last shift. You don't have time to think. You don't have time to be tired. You only have time to move. You stumble into the cold, onto the deck where wind stings your face and salt cakes your eyebrows. The sea is never still. The work is never done. You might be set to the rigging climbing high, feet gripping narrow rope, hands frozen to the lines. Your arms ache. Your fingers burn. The wind screams through the canvas like a warning. One slip, one missed knot, and it's a long fall into the deep, uncaring water below. Or you might be on the deck, scrubbing with brine-soaked brushes, pushing filth into the scuppers, knowing it will return tomorrow. You chip ice from the masts in colder climates, your breath a pale cloud, your gloves stiff with frost. You heave barrels, haul ropes, mend sails, patch leaks, bail water. It does not end. Sometimes your work takes you to the hold, deep into the belly of the ship, where shadows crawl and the air is thick with the scent of whale oil and damp timber. It is a place of silence, interrupted only by groaning wood and the soft, irregular slosh of liquid in barrels. You carry lanterns, you check supplies, you measure out rations, you count, you lift, you carry again. The work shifts with the ship's needs, but the weight of it never changes. What's light in the morning is heavier in the dark. Tasks seem smaller when you're rested, though you rarely are. And when storms come, work takes on a new form entirely pure survival. You climb soaked rigging, hang over the side to lash a sail, fight the wheel to keep the bow facing the waves. The water lashes at you. The wind tears at your coat. Men are thrown, bruised, broken. But you keep working, because stopping isn't a choice. And then the watch ends. Another bell. Your hands tremble. Your breath fogs the night air. Your shoulders throb. You descend once more into the ship's gut, but you don't collapse. Not yet. You only have 4 hours. 4 hours until the bell calls again. So you eat or don't. You lie down or try. But sleep doesn't always come when it's told to. Time loses meaning. The days bleed into one another. You measure your life in bells and bruises, in aching limbs and windburned cheeks. You forget the feel of solid ground. You forget what silence sounds like without the creak of wood and the slap of water. You forget your last full night's sleep. This is not work. This is ritual. Repetition without relief. A life ruled by rhythm, by rope, by wind. And in that slow, grinding pattern, something inside you begins to fade. Not your will, necessarily, but your shape. You become part of the ship, worn, useful, and never quite at rest. Chipping ice, scrubbing decks, monotony with frostbite. There are no days off, no slow mornings, no warm corners in which to retreat. And when your ship pushes into colder waters, as it must, to chase the giants of the deep, you begin to understand just how relentless the work can be, even when it seems to do nothing at all. The cold arrives not like a visitor, but like a siege. It creeps first into your fingertips, then into your breath, then your bones. The wind changes character. It is no longer a force to brace against, but something sharp, something cutting. A blade that slices your cheeks, numbs your lips, and settles like iron around your chest. And still, the work continues. The first duty of the day, no matter how cold, no matter how early, is to scrub. Always the deck. Always the same strokes. You grab the coarse brush, bristles stiff from dried salt, and bend low. Your hands are bare because gloves don't grip well. The bucket beside you is filled with seawater, drawn fresh, though there's nothing fresh about it. You dunk the brush, feeling the sting as the water touches skin. It bites like broken glass. You begin. Long, dragging scrubs across wood, grooved with years of wear. You push aside flakes of dried blubber, slime left behind from barrels or boots, bits of rope, flecks of rust, strands of hair. The brine acts like bleach, but it also dries everything out your skin, splits in thin, painful cracks that never quite heal. And just when you've worked up warmth in your arms and shoulders, the next task begins. Ice. It forms overnight along the rails, on the rigging, in the folds of canvas. Thin at first, like glass, then thicker. Sometimes it builds up in great, jagged clusters that look almost beautiful in the pale morning light. But there's no time for admiration. You take the iron bar or the blunt mallet. You strike carefully so as not to damage the wood. Tap, chip, tap again. Ice flies in shards. Some strike your face, your chest, your arms. You blink often. You wince. You keep going. In the rigging, it's worse. You climb with cold, stiffened hands, rope rough beneath your fingers, boots slipping slightly on icy crossbeams. The sail lines are frozen in places. You chip them loose with the same rhythm. Crack, peel, tug. A wrong move can snap a rope or worse, send you falling. But your hands no longer feel the cold. That's its trick. It numbs you until you think you're safe. And that's when it hurts you. Below deck, where it should be warmer, the cold lingers like a secret. Your clothes never truly dry. They hang from pegs, stiff and sour, and you put them back on each day like armor that's grown too small. Wool shrinks, leather cracks. Your boots wear holes from the inside out. Frostbite isn't rare. Fingers go white, then gray. Toes grow silent. Joints ache in a way you learn to ignore. There are no doctors, no warming fires. Only motion, only labor, only the next task. And still the deck must shine. It must be scrubbed and chipped and cleared, not for beauty, but for safety. Ice makes everything slick. Cleanliness keeps the ship alive. A dirty deck is a dangerous one. A frozen rope is a failed sail. The ritual matters. You do not ask why. You do not complain. You simply begin again. And as you kneel, brush in hand, wind slicing through the gap in your coat, you begin to understand the quiet madness of life at sea. Not the loud fear of storms or the sudden terror of whales, but the slow erosion of self beneath monotony. The kind that chips away at you, like ice from a railing, flake by flake, day after day, until there is only the work and your body doing it. The call to hunt, rowing for hours toward terror. The call comes not as a question, but a sharp, urgent command from the crow's nest high above the deck. A lookout has spotted the telltale sign, a thin spout of mist rising far out on the horizon, brief but unmistakable. A whale has surfaced. Somewhere, barely visible, a breath has broken the surface of the sea, and now everything changes. There is no delay. The crew springs to life, and you are among them. Muscles already tensing, instincts sharpening despite the weight of fatigue. Orders are shouted, and hands move automatically, lowering the whaleboats from their cradles with practiced haste. These boats are not large, perhaps 25 to 30 feet long, narrow, light, built to skim the surface like needles over fabric. They are delicate things, really, for a task so brutal. You scramble in, your place already known. 5 men to the oars, 1 at the helm, 1 at the bow, with harpoon in hand. No conversation, no second thoughts. The sea gapes wide before you, and the hunt begins. The rhythm of rowing is immediate and unforgiving. The oars dig deep, pulling you across the surface with desperate repetition. Each stroke draws sweat, even in cold air. Your arms burn quickly. Your lower back protests. The salt stings fresh blisters on your palms. And still you row, not for minutes, not for an hour, sometimes for hours, toward a beast you may never catch, toward a spot that may already be empty. The lookout in your boat keeps his eyes locked on the water ahead. Every shadow might be a fluke. Every ripple might be a spout. The sea offers no markers. Only waves and glare and uncertainty. The sun blinds you from one side. The salt crusts your lashes. Your mouth is dry, but there's no pause for water. When the whale finally surfaces again closer now, its presence is almost mythic. A shape beneath the water, massive and silent. The back breaks the surface first, dark, smooth, barnacled. A sound follows a long, low exhale, like wind through a cavern. You smell it, something ancient and raw, a blend of seawater and breath drawn from deep inside the earth. The boat grows quiet. The oars now move without splashing. Every creak of wood seems too loud. The harpooner stands, steady despite the roll of the sea. His arm draws back, line coiled at his feet. The whale is close now 30 yards, maybe 20, larger than your boat, more muscle than your entire crew combined. The harpoon flies. It strikes with a sickening thunk, not deep enough to kill, just deep enough to anchor, to attach, and the instant it lands, the whale bolts. The boat lurches forward. The line screams as it pays out, looping around the post, singing with tension. You grip the sides. Your stomach drops. You are no longer rowing. You are being dragged. This is the Nantucket sleigh ride, a name sailors speak with awe and dread. The whale speeds beneath the water, pulling your small craft like a toy behind a storm. Spray blinds you. The wind howls. The sea hisses past. Time disappears. It might be minutes. It might be longer. Eventually, the whale slows, tired, bleeding, confused, and now the real danger begins. You row again slowly, cautiously drawing close for the final blow. A long lance now replaces the harpoon. The aim is not to wound, but to kill. It must reach deep, strike true, find the heart. The lance is driven again and again until the thrashing stops. Blood rises around the boat in silent clouds. The water churns. And then, stillness. The body floats, massive and motionless. Steam rises from the blowhole. Birds begin to circle. You sit there, not triumphant, but emptied, exhausted, soaked in sweat and spray and something thicker. Your hands shake. Your arms hang like lead. You are not finished. Not even close. The body must be secured, the line drawn back to the ship. Sometimes it takes hours. Sometimes the sea shifts, and the corpse sinks before you can recover it. But if it holds, if it floats, you tow it. Slowly, painfully. The oars creak. The crew says nothing. There is no cheering. Only labor. You row in silence. A boat dragging a mountain, back to a ship that waits, ready to become a floating butchery. The hunt is over, and now the real work begins. Death by rope or blade, handling the whale. The whale lies alongside the ship now, its massive body tethered tightly by thick ropes looped around the tail and fins, secured with knots that have never failed, not because they are elegant, but because they are born of necessity. The ocean swells gently, and the whale rises and falls with it, a slow, unsettling rhythm. Even in death, it moves. Its skin is slick, dark, almost metallic in sheen, mottled with scars, barnacles, and the fresh wounds of the hunt. It is enormous longer than the ship is wide and dwarfs the men who now gather above it, peering over the gunwales with tools in hand and sleeves already rolled. The deck is cleared. The try-works' great iron pots for rendering fat have been prepared. The fire is banked, but waiting. And then comes the call, cutting in. This is the moment when the romanticism of the hunt vanishes. This is the labor of death. One man climbs onto the carcass itself, barefoot, steadying himself with a line as he steps onto the cold, blood-slick flesh. The surface gives slightly beneath him, like walking on a waterlogged mattress. Others brace themselves at the rail with long-handled spades and flensing knives, tools not of delicacy, but of brute precision. They begin at the head. A deep incision is made, carving into the thick blubber that encases the animal. The cut reveals a dense layer of fat, creamy white, and steaming in the chill air, releasing a strange, sweet aroma that hangs heavily over the ship. One man wedges in a hook, called a blubber hook, and the winch begins to crank. Slowly, a long, curling strip of blubber is peeled away from the whale's body in a spiral, like the rind of an enormous, tragic fruit. This ribbon of fat is called the blanket piece, and it comes away with a slurping sound that echoes off the waves. Men work in pairs, balancing across the slick surface, slicing deep and straight. The blade must stay sharp, and the cuts must be clean. One wrong movement, one slip, and the man, not the whale, will bleed. Below, others receive the cuttings. They haul the heavy strips onto the deck, where they are chopped into chunks called Bible leaves, thin sheets of fat ready for rendering. These are passed to the tryworks, where the real transformation begins. But that task is for later. The body is not hollow. Once the blubber is gone, there is muscle to remove, bone to navigate, organs to extract. The head is particularly difficult, a solid block of material, and within it, the most valuable prize of all, the spermaceti, a waxy substance housed inside the great square head of the sperm whale. It is so prized for its clarity and purity that no expense is spared to harvest it. A special bucket, a long-handled dipper, and patient scooping retrieves this precious substance. The cavity inside the whale's head is deep, warm, oddly quiet. The men call it the case. Working inside, it is like reaching into a cathedral of silence, broken only by the soft, wet sound of scooping. And while all this is happening, time presses down. The sea does not wait. The sun begins to dip. Gulls scream above, and sharks circle below, drawn by blood, by motion, by old instinct. Sometimes they snap at the carcass. Sometimes they snap at the men. No one can afford to fall in. Evening approaches, but the cutting continues. The body, once whole, becomes segments. Ropes lift ribs, hooks swing entrails. Buckets splash down and come up heavy. The deck becomes slick. Every surface smells of oil, iron, and death. But no one stops. This is wealth, raw and warm. This is the point of the voyage. When finally the whale is spent stripped of what it can give, it is released. The carcass, now skeletal and cavernous, drifts slowly from the side of the ship. It sinks, sometimes with a gurgling sigh, sometimes quietly. The water closes over it, as though it had never been. And the men do not speak. They wipe their hands on oily rags, lean their heads back, stretch their tired arms. Some light pipes, some rinse with brine. Others simply stare at the sea, as though hoping it won't ask this of them again tomorrow. But it will. Boiling blubber, the most revolting job at sea. Once the whale has given its body, the labor moves from the grotesque to the infernal. If the hunt was a test of strength, and the flensing a test of endurance, then what comes next, the boiling, is a test of sheer tolerance. For the nose, for the lungs, for the mind. You do not forget the first time you approach the tryworks. They sit on the main deck, two vast iron pots embedded in a brick furnace. The bricks are stained black, chipped from years of heat and salt. The furnace itself is fed with wood ware on a ship, or with the dried scraps of whale blubber, called scraps or cracklings, tossed into the fire as fuel. It's an efficient system, a self-consuming beast. Once lit, the flames grow quickly. Smoke begins to rise, thick and greasy. curling into the sky in dark plumes that cling to your clothes, your skin, your very breath. It is not like wood smoke. It does not carry the comfort of a hearth. This is industrial, animal, raw. It sticks to your nostrils, coats your tongue, settles into your lungs. Even when the fire is out, you'll smell it in your hair for weeks. The try pots are filled with chunks of blubber, those white, fatty slabs cut from the whale just hours earlier. They hiss as they hit the hot iron, melting slowly into thick golden oil. Bubbles rise, steam billows. The surface shifts like lava, shimmering and oily, disturbed only by the long-handled ladles that stir it. You stand near the pots, shovel in hand, face slick with sweat, shirt clinging to your back. The heat is unbearable. Even in freezing air, even under cloudy skies, the furnace radiates a dry, punishing warmth. Your eyes water constantly. Your boots grow soft from the heat beneath. The deck itself sometimes buckles. This is why ships spread a layer of sand or brick below the tryworks, because one wrong spill could turn fire into catastrophe. Every man working the tryworks moves with exaggerated care. One splash of hot oil can blister skin in seconds. One slip of the shovel can send flame to the sails. It is a dance of risk, performed slowly, with calloused hands and tight jaws. And still, the smell. As the oil boils, it releases something beyond rancid. It is not just unpleasant, it is consuming. Like flesh left in the sun, like fat burning in a closed room. It sickens some men. Others become numb to it. A few claim to grow fond of it, though whether that's pride or madness is never clear. You shovel cracklings into the fire. You stir the pots. You pour the rendered oil into barrels, carefully, funneling it through cloth to strain out bone and gristle. Each barrel is sealed with wax, marked, and stored deep in the hold. This is the reason you are here. This is what the ship was built for. Not the chase, not the kill. This. It takes hours to process a whale, sometimes days, and the tryworks do not stop for sleep. Crews rotate in shifts, working through the night, bathed in firelight and coated in soot. The deck becomes slippery with grease. Sparks drift up into the sails. A moment's carelessness, and the whole ship could be lost. When it is over, when the last barrel is sealed, and the fire finally dies down, you stand with hands raw, throat sore, eyes rimmed red. The tryworks cool slowly. The pots hiss, crack, settle. You rest, but not really. The smell follows you. You feel it in your teeth. You dream in smoke. Even the cold wind cannot carry it away. And tomorrow, you may light the furnace again. Storms and stillness. Two ways to go mad. There are two great forces that shape life at sea. One comes with noise and fury, with wind that screams and waves that rise like hungry mountains. The other comes with silence, stretching out across the horizon like a held breath. Storms and stillness, both are feared. Both can break a man. Let's begin with the storm. It does not arrive all at once. First, the wind shifts subtle at first, then unsettling. The sky changes color. Clouds gather in long streaks, darkening from the edges inward. The sea, once gently rolling, begins to heave with purpose. The birds disappear. The air grows thick, heavy, electric. The men move quickly. Voices rise. Sails are reefed, lines tightened, cargo lashed down. Every hand is needed. Every task must be done with haste, but without panic. And then it begins. The first wave crashes like a cannon blast. Water spills over the rail, soaking everything, everyone. The second wave is bigger, and then they come faster, steeper, less like water, and more like walls. The ship tilts hard to starboard. Men scramble to keep their footing, clutching ropes, pressing backs to the mast. Rain pours in sheets. Wind tears at clothes and skin, howling louder than any order. Voices are lost to the roar, The deck becomes a chaos of motion sails snapping like gunfire, barrels sliding, tools clanging. Lanterns swing violently, then go dark. You cannot see. You cannot hear. You can only feel the icy water pouring into your boots, the sting of wind-driven salt in your eyes, the sheer, terrible power of the sea beneath you. Below deck, the hammocks swing like pendulums. The hull groans with pressure. Buckets slide. Barrels thump against one another. The air is thick with fear. Not the loud, panicked kind, but the quiet, gripping kind that settles in your chest and doesn't let go. You think about falling overboard, about being lost. You imagine the cold embrace of the sea, the quick drag beneath, the silence after. Some do fall. Not many return. The ocean does not hesitate, and yet somehow the ship holds. The storm passes. The sun returns, pale and indifferent. The crew gathers, soaked and exhausted, faces drawn tight with relief they won't admit. But the stillness, that's worse. It comes days later, maybe weeks. The wind dies. The sea flattens. The sails hang limp. The ship drifts. At first, it's welcome, a reprieve. Time to rest, to repair, to breathe. But slowly, the silence becomes something else. The heat builds. There is no breeze. The sun presses down like a great steady hand. The deck bakes. The barrels sweat. The air turns thick and unmoving. You sweat without effort. Your shirt clings to your skin. Your mouth dries. Water is rationed. Tempers shorten. Nothing moves. No birds. No clouds. The horizon becomes a straight line of blue on blue, never changing. Days pass. The food tastes of dust. The same routines repeat, emptier each time. Men start talking to themselves. Some drink too much. Others stare for hours without blinking. There is no sound but the creak of wood, the slap of a line against the mast, the faint thud of boots pacing. You check the horizon again and again. It never changes. Time loses meaning. Watches blend together. You sleep, wake, eat, work, but nothing feels real. It's like floating in a painting. Beautiful, endless, suffocating. You long for wind, for clouds, even for danger. Because at least in a storm, you feel alive. In the stillness, you disappear. And when, finally, the wind returns, when the sails snap to life and the ship shudders forward, it feels like waking from a long, stifling dream. The crew breathes again. The work resumes. But something lingers. A quiet understanding shared between men who faced both fury and silence and know which one truly gets inside your head. The Essex disaster, the shipwreck that inspired Moby Dick, the Nantucket start, men chasing profit, not glory. Imagine a place where everything smells faintly of salt, oil, and ambition. Nantucket, early 1800s, not yet a mythic place, not yet a symbol of doomed whaling lore, but already the pulsing heart of an empire built on the backs of whales and the men who hunted them. The town is small but prosperous. Cobblestone streets rattle with cartwheels. The houses are simple but neatly painted. The true wealth lies not in grand architecture, but in what sails from its harbor sleek. Low-hulled whaling ships designed for speed, for distance, and for returning heavy with barrels of oil. This oil, drawn from the giants of the deep, lights the lamps of cities. It greases the gears of industry. It perfumes the halls of the wealthy and warms the homes of the modest. To join a whaling voyage is to enter into a strange economy, not of wages, but of shares. Each man receives a fractional portion of the voyage's eventual profit, from captain to greenhorn. You are not paid by the day. You are paid by the whale. And that means every decision, every risk, every harpoon thrown is done with one thought in mind. Return with oil or don't return at all. In 1819, A ship named Essex is fitted and readied for departure. She is not new, just shy of 90 feet, already seasoned by voyages past. She carries a modest crew, most of them young. Some are barely men. Some have made this voyage before. Some are eager. Some are merely desperate. Among them is Owen Chase, a first mate with sharp eyes and a sharper ambition. He is known to be serious, steady, unshakable, a man who expects to command his own ship before long. But for now, he answers to Captain George Pollard, just 29, and on his first command. Quiet, polite, earnest, a man from a good family, respected but untested. They are not explorers. They are not heroes. They are workers chasing profit. Their destination? The Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from home. A voyage expected to last 2 to 3 years. The Essex sets sail on a calm August morning. Families gather on the dock. Wives wave handkerchiefs. Children cry. The sailors shout their last goodbyes, voices half hopeful, half hollow. No one says what they all know. Some of these men will not come back. As the sails fill and the ship leans into the wind, Nantucket fades behind them, and before long, only water remains. Days stretch into weeks, weeks into months. The land becomes a memory, the horizon a permanent companion. They pass the Atlantic's moods. They round the Horn of South America, where weather is no longer just inconvenient but dangerous. Ships have vanished here. The waves swell large enough to lift the Essex like a toy. The wind rips through sails like cloth. But they survive it, because they are hunting. Every decision aboard the Essex is made with the hope of filling barrels. They chase reports of whale pods, even when the leads are faint. The further they go, the fewer other ships they see. But the Pacific holds promise: open waters, underfished regions, whales still untouched by the harpoons of New England. Months pass. The work becomes routine. Hard, exhausting, but expected. And then, a decision is made that will alter everything. They hear word passed from another ship, like a whisper blown on wind of a rich hunting ground deep in the southern Pacific, far west near the equator. Few ships go there. It's isolated, remote, unsettled, but rich. Captain Pollard is hesitant. It's far, it's unfamiliar. But the men are hungry for a successful voyage, and Owen Chase pushes. It will be worth it, he argues. There is oil to be had. So the Essex sets a new course, further from home, further from safety, and into waters that no one yet knows. A whale is waiting ... First hunt, triumph over terror in the Pacific ... The sea out here is different. It no longer wears the shifting moods of the Atlantic, no longer bristles with the bitter edge of the Cape Horn crossing. Here, in the vast openness of the southern Pacific, everything feels bigger. The sky is a dome clean, high, and endless. The water rolls slow and deep, a shimmering plain of liquid blue that stretches farther than any eye can see. The Essex, a speck in a blue wilderness, glides forward like a memory adrift. By the time the crew reaches these distant coordinates, they've been at sea for over a year. Their clothes hang loose from salt and wear. Their faces are harder now, lean and burned. Blisters have toughened into calluses. Hunger has been tamed to discipline. The men no longer chatter during the watches. They grunt, nod, gesture. Language has become economical, like everything else aboard the ship. Then one morning, as the sun climbs from the edge of the world, the cry rings out, "There she blows!" The lookout has spotted a whale, a sperm whale, unmistakable in its blunt head and diagonal spout. And it's not alone. A pod. Half a dozen at least. Possibly more. The sea is broken by great shadows rolling just beneath the surface, by sudden breaths expelled into the still morning air. The ship bursts into activity. The boats are lowered, 3 of them, each with a crew of 6 or 7. Owen Chase takes command of one, with Captain Pollard, and the second mate commanding the others. Each man has his place. Oars dip into the water. The rhythm begins. Rowing is not gentle. It is labor stripped to its essence. Backs bend, arms burn. The sun scorches skin already cracked with salt. The whales, massive and serene, glide ahead unaware or unconcerned. Then the chase. The boats close the distance. The whales seem impossibly large living islands, barnacled and silent, with small eyes and slow, purposeful motion. Each boat edges forward, closer, until the harpooner rises. The line is coiled carefully at his feet. The harpoon is heavy, balanced, ready. He throws. The harpoon strikes true. It sinks deep into the whale's side with a heavy thud, and all at once, the calm vanishes. The whale flails. Its fluke slams against the sea, sending walls of water skyward. Blood rises in the foam, and then it bolts. The boat is yanked forward, violently, oars skimming the surface as the line screams from its tub. Men cling to their sides, mouths tight, eyes wide. This is the Nantucket sleigh ride against speed, terror, and barely controlled motion across a wild sea. The ride doesn't last long. The whale tires. The lance is brought forth. This is the kill. It takes time. Each strike deepens the red in the water. The whale weakens. It slows. It sinks beneath the surface. And then, with final effort, rises one last time, its massive body trembling and exhales. Then stillness. The first mate gives the order. The men relax just slightly. The ropes are drawn tight. The process of towing begins. It is a success. The whale is theirs. A day's labor will follow. Flensing, oiling, rendering, but not yet. For a moment, they are still men in a small boat, bobbing on quiet water, victorious. It is a strange mix of emotion. Triumph, certainly. Relief, but also reverence. The creature was vast, powerful, intelligent, perhaps. The men don't speak of that, but it sits with them, quietly, under the sun. They return to the Essex with the whale in tow, tired but satisfied. Captain Pollard is pleased. Chase is confident. The crew, despite fatigue, smiles beneath grime and sweat. The barrels will fill. The voyage will be justified. The risk this far into untraveled waters seems worth it now. They do not know that this triumph will be their last ... A wrong turn. Venturing too far off course. Success has a way of breeding confidence, and on the Essex, confidence becomes momentum. After the fruitful hunt in the deep Pacific, the crew, now sun-darkened and wind-hardened, sets its course further west, deeper into uncharted regions where the sea maps are dotted with little more than imagination and hearsay. There are no harbors nearby, no rescue routes, no friendly ships. But in the minds of these men, this is the cost of opportunity. They believe that the fewer ships that have hunted these waters, the more plentiful the whales must be. And after months of scarcity, of chasing shadows across an empty ocean, they are willing to follow hope into the blue unknown. Captain Pollard, though cautious, is young and eager to prove himself. First Mate Chase, more assertive and ambitious, encouraged the move. They discussed the plan at dusk, leaning over sea charts lit by dim lantern light, tracing fingers across longitudes few have sailed. The names on the maps mean little. Most are speculative, some wildly inaccurate. But the Great Pacific calls and they answer. The course they set takes them far from established whaling lanes, past the line of the equator, out into what is now known as the South Pacific Gyre, one of the most isolated regions of open ocean on Earth. The winds here are erratic, the weather unpredictable, and the sun is relentless. As the Essex presses west, the ship begins to show its age. The wood creaks more often, the ropes fray faster, the sails catch awkwardly. Salt has eaten its way into everything, into nails, seams, pulleys, thoughts. Below deck, Water sloshes in the bilge with a sluggish weight, and rats scurry along beams, bold in their growing numbers. The men grow quieter. The days stretch, the food dwindles. Freshwater, already brackish from months in barrels, grows slimy with algae. The crew drinks little, eats less. Tempers thin like the shade under a noon sun. And yet still, the lookout climbs the mast each day, still scans the horizon, still calls out when nothing is there. Weeks pass, then months. Whales are scarce. The hope that once pulled them forward now begins to curl inward, heavy and bitter. Then, at last, a sign. In mid-November 1820, far from anywhere, the lookout spots whales. A pod, large, moving fast. The crew bursts into motion, lowering boats, shouting orders, grasping oars with renewed vigor. The excitement returns like breath after drowning. The Essex, once sluggish with routine, comes alive. But this time, there's something else. Among the pod is a massive whale bigger than any they've seen before. A bull, likely. It lingers oddly close to the ship, observing, drifting, measuring. The men think nothing of it. Whales are animals, creatures of instinct, not intention. They ready their boats, launch with practiced speed, and chase the others. And as the whale boats fan out into the ocean in pursuit of the pod, they leave the Essex lightly crewed, quiet, vulnerable. The great whale turns, and the ocean holds its breath. The whale strikes back, the ramming that doomed the Essex. It begins with a sound, a low, resonant splash, not the kind caused by waves or wind, but by something alive, intentional, heavy. A sailor still aboard the Essex, left behind, as the rest of the crew rows after the pod, turns toward the noise. What he sees freezes him in place. A whale, enormous, dark, and unsettlingly close, is surfacing near the ship. Its head breaches the water slowly, deliberately. Steam erupts from its blowhole in a long, guttural exhale. Then it sinks again, silent, watching. At first, it seems like nothing. Whales are curious sometimes. They come close, investigate the strange floating shapes above them, then disappear into the deep. But this one lingers. And then it turns, no longer drifting, no longer watching. Now swimming fast, toward the Essex. The men on deck shout. One fumbles for the long tiller to shift the ship's heading. Another scrambles to haul a sail around, but it's already too late. The water parts before the massive shape. 50 feet long, possibly more. A head like a wall of living muscle, scarred and streaked with barnacles. It gains speed. The impact comes like thunder. The whale strikes the bow of the Essex head-on, an explosion of sound. Wood splintering, men falling to the deck. The entire ship lurches backward. The mast shudders. Barrels shift. A sharp crack echoes through the hull. The bow is stove in, crushed inward like soft bread under a hammer. The whale dives beneath the ship, then resurfaces a few hundred yards away. There is blood, possibly its own, smearing the water around it. It floats, motionless again, as if contemplating what it has done. The men aboard the Essex scramble to assess the damage. Water floods the forward hold. The ship lists slightly. The pumps are manned. Buckets are drawn. Tools clatter as emergency repairs begin. But it's not over. The whale returns. This time, it approaches from the side, faster, with deliberate force, as if not just curious, but angry. It slams into the hull again, this time just forward of the mainmast. Another deafening crash. Wood flies. The ship groans. A new breach opens water, pours in freely now. The ship begins to list further, unnaturally. A shudder passes through her from bow to stern like a final breath. The whale disappears. This is no accident, no mindless panic. The men do not speak it aloud, but they feel it in their bones. This creature knew what it was doing. Captain Pollard, returning in one of the whaleboats, sees his ship heaving on the horizon, broken and sinking. The mainmast leans. The bow is crushed inward. Smoke from the galley fire curls against the wind. Men cling to the rail. The Essex is dying. They do what sailors always do. They fight the sea with what they have. Sails are struck. Barrels of hardtack and fresh water, what remains of them, are tossed into the remaining boats. Navigation equipment, a few charts, a quadrant, no chronometer, no long-distance communication. Just 3 open whaleboats, the open sea, and 20 men trying to survive. The Essex, wounded and waterlogged, begins to settle lower in the water. The pumps can't keep up. The hull groans one last time. Then she dips bow first into the Pacific, her stern rising like a salute, and then she is gone. The men float in silence. The wind is calm. The sea is gentle again, almost cruelly so. No one speaks of the whale. They only watch the horizon, shrinking, and begin to understand the long shadow of what has just begun. Survivors' shame, what they never spoke of again. When the boats were finally found, half floating, half sinking, their sails ragged, their passengers nearly skeletal, the men inside did not cry out. They did not wave. They did not leap with joy. They simply stared, hollow-eyed, silent, sunken, more ghost than flesh. The first to be rescued were Owen Chase and the survivors of his boat. Found by the Indian, a passing British ship, they had been adrift for nearly 90 days. 90 days without proper food, without water, without hope. Their boat contained the remains of their dead crewmates' bones, picked clean, stored carefully, grimly. Captain Pollard's boat was found later. He was lying beneath a plank, shielding himself from the sun with what little remained of a coat. Next to him was Charles Ramsdell, still breathing, barely. On the bottom of the boat, in a dark pool of brine and rot, were the bones of their companions. Some broken to fit cooking implements, some scorched from fire, some labeled silently in memory. The sailors who boarded those boats turned away in horror. They said little. They asked no questions. The survivors were lifted aboard, wrapped in blankets, fed cautiously. They blinked at the sun, at the clean water, at the gentle creak of a ship not broken by whales or hunger. And still, they said almost nothing. When they reached land, they were gaunt to the point of disbelief. Their families wept. Their town received them with cautious warmth. But whispers came quickly. What had they eaten? How had they survived when others hadn't? Why had those men died and not them? Some survivors spoke openly. Owen Chase, methodical and pragmatic, recorded the events in a detailed account, dictated to a scribe. He described the storm, the whale's attack, the hunger, even the cannibalism delivered in calm, emotionless phrases. He would go on to captain other ships, but his nights were troubled. His family said he would wake in the dark, shouting. He boarded up his windows, convinced someone was watching. Captain Pollard, once a man of promise, never truly recovered. He sailed once more after the Essex, but fate followed him. That ship, too, was lost. He returned to Nantucket a broken figure, quiet, ashamed. He rarely left his home. When Herman Melville visited years later to hear the story from the man himself, Pollard received him politely, but would not speak of the boyo and coffin his cousin, who had died so that he might live. Other survivors refused to speak of it at all, not to family, not to friends. Some never returned to sea. Some drank. Some disappeared, but all of them carried the weight. You could see it in their posture, in the far-off look that overtook their eyes whenever the sea was mentioned. What they had done was not criminal, not in the eyes of maritime tradition. The drawing of lots was known, even expected, in such desperate times. But knowing you were forgiven did not lighten the burden. They had crossed a line no man ever wants to find. And so they lived, not in disgrace, but in unease. their names spoken in hushed tones, their survival both a marvel and a caution. And as the years passed and the Essex slipped into the ledger of maritime lore, the true weight of their journey became a whisper beneath the waves, a ghost story for sailors, a quiet reminder of how thin the line is between civilization and survival, between man and hunger, between the sea and those who try to master it. Herman Melville's obsession, turning horror into fiction. Years later, the story of the Essex would echo not only through maritime circles, but through literature transformed, reimagined, and reassembled into something mythical, something colossal. But beneath the grandeur of white whales and monomaniacal captains was a very real, very human tragedy that one man could not forget. That man was Herman Melville. When Moby Dick was published in 1851, it was unlike anything readers had seen before. A wild fusion of whaling manual, philosophical treatise, tragedy, and allegory. It baffled many and delighted few in its time. But buried beneath the labyrinth of language and symbolism lay a seed taken directly from the Pacific, the story of a whale that struck back. Melville, himself a sailor, had long been fascinated with the sea, not its romance, but its depth, its mystery, its danger. He had served aboard whaling ships in his youth. He had seen the toil, the brutality, the monotony broken by terror. But when he read Owen Chase's account of the Essex published in 1821, shortly after the disaster, it lodged in his mind like a harpoon point. He devoured it. The stark, matter-of-fact tone, the tension between duty and desperation, the horrifying logic of cannibalism recorded without judgment, and above all the whale. Here was not merely an animal, but a force, not just a hunted beast, but something almost sentient in its power. The whale that attacked the Essex had not simply defended itself. It had returned. It had assessed, targeted, and destroyed. Melville saw in that act a metaphor so vast it could barely be contained in a single book. Thus was born Moby Dick. In Melville's hands, the whale becomes not only a creature of flesh and blubber, but a symbol of nature's unknowable will, of man's arrogance, of vengeance, divinity, madness. Captain Ahab, too, emerges as more than a leader. He is obsession personified, broken, brilliant, terrifying, a man whose private wound becomes a public curse. But Melville did more than borrow the Essex's spine. He sought out its surviving captain. In the early 1850s, while researching Moby Dick, Melville visited Nantucket and met George Pollard. By then, Pollard was a humble night watchman, his seafaring days long behind him. His reputation quietly faded into pity. They spoke, briefly, respectfully. Melville did not pry, but he saw something in Pollard's eyes that haunted him. A man who had looked into the abyss, survived it, and had not been the same since. Melville later wrote of Pollard, "To the islanders, he was a nobody. To me, the most impressive man I ever met. The man who inspired Ahab was not mad, nor vengeful. He was quiet, haunted, diminished, but his story, his real story, was already echoing through every page of Melville's work. Fiction had taken root, in fact, and the sea had given birth to a myth. But in that myth, Melville layered truths too vast to be spoken plainly, about the cruelty of fate, about the fragility of reason, about the smallness of man adrift in an ocean that never blinks. The Essex was never just a shipwreck. It was a mirror. And Melville, with pen in hand and salt still in his blood, held it up for the world to see. Truth stranger than fiction, comparing fact to Moby Dick. When Moby Dick first arrived in the hands of 19th century readers, many struggled to grasp its enormity. The tale was dense, sprawling, filled with whaling terminology, Shakespearean digressions, and philosophical asides. But those who knew the sea, who had really known it, recognized something deeper beneath its waves. They saw the shape of a true story, one not invented, but reworked. Fictionalized, yes, but built upon the bones of reality. And those bones came from the Essex. Yet side by side, the novel and the facts diverge in startling ways. The real whale was no phantom. It was a sperm whale, yes, like Moby Dick, but not albino, not legendary. It had no name. There were no rumors of it haunting the seas, no crews whispering of its wrath. It was simply a massive creature in its element. What made it remarkable wasn't its appearance. It was its behavior. In Chase's account, the whale is described with eerie precision. Around 85 feet long, dark-skinned, and unusually deliberate in its attacks. It approached the Essex, paused, and rammed her bow not once, but twice. Each time, it swam a short distance away, turned, and charged, like it was thinking, like it knew. This is where fact shades into something uncanny. Even the men of the Essex, hardened sailors not prone to fantasy, couldn't quite explain what happened. They never called it revenge, but they didn't call it accident either. Melville, ever the mythmaker, took that ambiguity and gave it shape. His Moby Dick is no mere whale. It is white, ghostly, enormous beyond reason. It drags entire crews into madness. It becomes the embodiment of fate itself. Uncatchable, unfathomable, unstoppable. He stripped away the quiet horror of starvation and replaced it with something cosmic. The Essex's Captain Pollard is remembered as cautious, dignified, even gentle. Ahab, by contrast, is feverish and wild-eyed. He nails gold coins to the mast and speaks in riddles. He curses heaven and hunts his quarry not for oil, but for meaning. Ahab is obsessed. Pollard was simply overwhelmed. Owen Chase, the first mate of the Essex, survives by discipline and practicality. He keeps journals, charts, makes decisions. In Moby Dick, his counterpart, Starbuck, is religious, hesitant, and increasingly terrified of his captain. Chase endures. Starbuck suffers. But what Moby Dick doesn't show is the aftermath. It doesn't follow the crew into lifeboats, doesn't touch the silence of drawing lots, doesn't show the slow erasure of morality in the heat and hunger of the open sea. It replaces real horror with metaphorical grandeur, and in doing so, it spares the reader something the survivors never escaped: memory. Yet, in its way, Moby Dick remains true not to the events, but to their feeling. It captures the scale of the ocean, the insignificance of man, the pull toward obsession when everything around you is uncontrollable. It understands the strange, quiet violence of nature, not in the lashing of waves, but in the stare of a whale before it charges a wooden hull. In the end, truth and fiction sail alongside each other. One tells us what happened, the other why it mattered. The Essex was real. Its bones rest somewhere on the ocean floor. Its men lived and died and endured. Their tale is spare, brutal, factual. Melville gave it poetry. He turned salt into scripture, and in that transformation, he ensured that the whale would never truly vanish. Ocean myths and deep sea mysteries of the 1800s. Sea serpents and squids, beliefs of the time. To sail the open ocean in the 1800s was not merely to leave behind land, it was to leave behind certainty. Out there, where maps still bore blank spaces and compass needles twitched inexplicably, men entered a world that was as much myth as it was geography. And in this world, the line between the known and the imagined blurred with every mile. Among the most enduring beliefs of the 19th century seafarer were the tales of sea serpents colossal, snake-like creatures said to slither just beneath the surface, their long necks and humped backs rising like ghostly ridges in the dawn mist. Sailors from Norway to New England told of these beasts, describing them in eerily similar terms: scales that caught the light like polished stone, eyes as large as lanterns, and mouths filled with teeth like daggers. Some reports were elaborate. A serpent seen off the coast of Gloucester, Massachusetts, in 1817 was said to be over 100 feet long, its head shaped like a horse's, with a dark mane rippling down its back. Entire crews swore by these sightings. They drew sketches. They submitted statements to marine societies. Naturalists were intrigued. Newspapers ran illustrations. And while skeptics scoffed, the sea kept its silence. Then there were the giant squids, more feared, less seen, and even more disturbing in their implications. The idea of a monstrous squid, with tentacles long enough to wrap around a ship and drag it under, came not from fantasy alone, but from fragments. Pieces of reality washed ashore, beached carcasses, impossibly large. Tentacles retrieved from the bellies of whales, some as thick as a man's thigh. Scars on sperm, whales' strange circular marks, like the imprint of suction cups. These clues built a legend, the croaking, known by name, feared by nature. Sailors whispered of tentacles breaking the surface at night, reaching with slow, deliberate grace. They spoke of creatures that could pluck a man from the deck like a toy. And perhaps most chilling, they told of the quiet, the way these beasts moved without sound, the way the sea seemed to hold its breath when they appeared. Science at the time struggled to explain. There were no photographs, no specimens, only drawings and anecdotes. But as the 19th century progressed, confirmation began to emerge. In 1857, a Danish zoologist named Japetus Steenstrup formally classified the species. Architeuthis dux, a giant squid based on beached remains. The kraken was no longer merely legend. It was real. But the stories persisted because they were more than explanations. They were reflections of what the sea felt like to those who sailed it. Vast, deep, unknowable. A realm where things could exist and never be seen. Where danger could rise from the depths without warning. Even today, in the stillness of the ocean, when the waves are calm and the sky is overcast, there are sailors who glance at the horizon and imagine the ridge of a serpent's back just disappearing beneath the surface, or the glint of a tentacle sliding out of sight. Because belief, like the ocean, has layers. And in the 1800s, when your world was a boat and your future lay hidden beneath thousands of miles of water, monsters made as much sense as anything else. St. Elmo's fire, ghostly glow, or electrical phenomenon. There are nights at sea when the sky grows too still, too heavy. The air thickens, not with rain, but with pressure. The sea becomes dark and glassy, and a strange silence falls over the ship. On these nights, sailors often spoke in hushed voices, not of storms or sea serpents, but of light. Unnatural light. It would begin at the masthead, a soft, bluish glow, like the halo of a candle glimpsed through fog. Then the tips of the yardarms would shimmer, the ends of the rigging, sometimes even the tops of the sailors' hats. Tiny flames, flickering but never burning. Cold light, eerie light. They called it St. Elmo's fire. To 19th century sailors, this phenomenon was equal parts omen and wonder. Some believed it was a blessing, a sign of divine protection from St. Erasmus, the patron saint of sailors, appearing to watch over them. Others feared it was a warning, that a storm was coming, or worse, that the souls of drowned men were climbing the rigging to warn the living. Descriptions varied slightly, but always carried the same core. A crackling light, ghostly and silent, appearing during times of tension at sea. Some claimed to hear faint hissing. Others reported the smell of ozone, sharp and dry, like scorched air. Many knelt and prayed when it appeared. A few wept. But behind the mystery lies science. Not that 19th century sailors would have called it that. St. Elmo's fire is a plasma phenomenon. It occurs when a sharp electric field ionizes the air, causing the molecules to glow. The pointed tips of ship masts, rigging, and even metal tools become the perfect discharge points. It's not fire, and it doesn't burn, but it behaves like flame dancing, flickering, reacting to movement. It can last seconds or minutes. In modern terms, we understand it as a form of corona discharge, a kind of low-grade electrical event triggered by atmospheric conditions, particularly before thunderstorms. But imagine not knowing that. Imagine seeing your ship glow in the dead of night, your hands lit with pale blue fire, the sea silent, the clouds swollen with secrets. No wonder they called it sacred. Some logs from the era describe entire masts glowing from tip to deck. One journal from a merchant vessel in 1839 reads, "The foremast lit with ghost flame, and the boatswain crossed himself 3 times before tying off the staysail." Another mentions sailors refusing to touch ropes, anointed by heaven. And perhaps most unsettling, St. Elmo's fire could appear even when the sky was clear. It defied expectation. It arrived without warning. And it disappeared just as quickly. For sailors of the 1800s, who spent months without land, living by weather and wind, such light was not merely a phenomenon. It was a message. From God, from the sea, from something unseen. And even now, when we explain it with voltage and ions, the image remains. A tall ship in the black ocean night, glowing quietly at its highest points, bathed in blue fire that whispers no sound and leaves behind only wonder. Songs of sirens, the soundtrack of delirium. There are some things you hear at sea that no one on land would believe. Whispers beneath the waves, singing on windless nights, the sudden sound of laughter that seems to rise from the water itself. These are the moments that send chills down even the most seasoned sailor's spine, not because they're loud, but because they're soft, because they feel personal. In the 19th century, when weeks could pass without sight of land, and sleep came in fractured pieces between watch bells and swaying hammocks, sailors often reported hearing voices music, even on the wind. They described faint, melodic tones echoing over the open water, often at night, often when the sea was still. They called it the singing of sirens. Sirens had long held a place in maritime folklore, but in the age of sail, their legend took on new shape. They were no longer just the temptresses of Greek mythology, who lured ships onto rocks with celestial music. In the minds of many 1800 seafarers, sirens were something more subtle, more insidious. Not creatures seen, but heard. Not danger from without, but from within. Picture this. You are alone on deck, standing watch in the stillness of the early morning hours. The stars are bright, the sea calm. You haven't slept properly in days. And then, just barely, you hear it something faint, drifting toward you on the breeze. A tune, a lullaby. Not words exactly, but notes. Notes that shouldn't be there. You freeze. You scan the water. Nothing. You look to the rigging. Empty. You are alone. And yet, the sound continues. For sailors of the 1800s, who lived lives of deep repetition and constant fatigue, such experiences were common enough to be recorded in logs and journals, not as fantasy, but as fact. "The men report hearing song again last night," wrote one captain in 1826, "though I assured them it must be the wind through the stays." Another entry from a Spanish brig described the sigh of a woman in the water, though we saw no one. These weren't just hallucinations born of boredom. They were real to them, and more than once they resulted in danger. Men jumping overboard to chase a voice, others waking in panic, convinced something was calling from the dark. Entire crews sometimes paused work to listen, just to make sure they weren't the only one hearing it. Science offers explanations, of course. The mind under prolonged stress is prone to auditory hallucinations. Sleep deprivation, dehydration, heat stroke, all common conditions aboard whaling ships, can produce complex soundscapes that feel real. Add to this the natural phenomena the sea itself wails, singing just below the surface, the wind vibrating through rigging, the groan of wood under pressure, and it's easy to see how music could be imagined. But what makes the siren myth so potent is how deeply intimate it becomes. The music doesn't demand, it invites. It doesn't shout, it waits. It isn't a roar like the storm, or a crash like the whale. It's the soft suggestion of something familiar, something beautiful, something home. And that's why it lingers. Because it offers not terror but relief. And so, sailors would write of it, whisper of it, blame it when someone broke down or stepped too close to the edge. Because on the sea, where the line between waking and dreaming thins, and the vast quiet surrounds you on all sides, even a hint of a song can feel like a spell. Messages in bottles, forgotten pleas found decades later. There is something hauntingly human about the act of casting a message into the sea. A bottle, sealed tight. Inside, a scrap of paper, sometimes carefully folded, sometimes hastily scrawled. Words written not to a specific person, but to someone. Anyone. A stranger in the future. A silent plea for recognition, rescue, or remembrance. In the 1800s, messages in bottles were not just romantic notions. They were practical acts of desperation. Ships vanished often. Storms struck without warning. Sickness swept through crews with alarming speed. A vessel that sailed proudly from port could disappear utterly, swallowed by the ocean and remembered only by name. And so, when disaster loomed, or when hope frayed thin, some sailors turned to the bottle. They'd take what they had: ledger scraps, ration slips, journal pages, and write what needed to be said. Coordinates, the name of the ship, the cause of distress. Sometimes a farewell to loved ones, sometimes a prayer. And then they'd seal it in glass, weighted just enough to float upright, and cast it over the side. A flick of the wrist, a final act of hope. These bottles, adrift without sails or purpose, became part of the sea's memory. Carried by currents, swept by gyres, they followed patterns no man could predict. Some were smashed against rocks, some were swallowed by kelp beds, but some were found. In 1864, a bottle washed ashore on the western coast of Ireland. Inside was a letter from a sailor aboard the Resolute, a ship last seen near Newfoundland. The message spoke of storm damage, a broken mast, and rapidly rising water. "We are going down," it read. "I do not think we shall survive the night." They hadn't. In 1886, another was found in the sands of Western Australia, 4,000 miles from where it had been thrown. The bottle, yellowed with time, held a German note from a ship involved in ocean current studies. Though not a message of distress, it was dated and signed, and verified the bottle's 132-year journey before discovery. Not all messages were from ships in peril. Some were romantic. A young woman in 1852 tossed a letter from the coast of Cornwall, addressed to her future husband, wherever he might be. It was found decades later by a farmer, who kept it on his mantle for the rest of his life. But for sailors, especially those on whaling voyages, the bottle had a more somber meaning. It was an unofficial will, a confession, a history written in the moment of fear. It was a way to mark your place in the world, even if you would not return to it. Sometimes these messages were bundled multiple notes from crew members, all shoved into a single bottle, each scribbled in different hands, describing the same doom from different angles. One would speak of sickness, another of a storm, another simply of home. And those who found them later washed ashore, buried in sand, caught in fishermen's nets, held not just a bottle, but a voice. A real voice from another time, echoing across decades. Proof that even in the most hopeless moments, someone had chosen to speak, someone had chosen to be found. The drift of the dead, tailies of ships with no crew. There are few things more unsettling to a sailor than a ship with no hands aboard. A vessel adrift, sails ragged, rudder loose, floating aimlessly across the waves, and utterly silent. No voices calling out, no movement on deck, just the slow rhythmic slap of waves against the hull, and the eerie creak of timber that should not be moving alone. In the 19th century, these were known as ghost ships, not just in the mythical sense, but in a very real, very tangible way. Ships that had clearly once been manned, clearly once sailed with purpose, now floating without crew, without command, and often with no explanation. And the most unnerving detail of all? Sometimes the ship was in perfect order. One of the most famous cases came in 1872, when the Mary Celeste was found drifting in the Atlantic. Though slightly later than our century of focus, it became emblematic of what every 1800s sailor feared. Her cargo was untouched. Her sails were mostly intact. The ship was seaworthy, and provisions were plenty. But the entire crew captain, wife, child, and sailors had vanished without a trace. The lifeboat was gone. No struggle, no blood, no sign of why they left or where they had gone. She was sailing slowly under partial canvas, her logbook entries ending just 10 days prior. Whatever happened, it had come swiftly and quietly. Other stories, often passed from sailor to sailor like cautionary psalms, told of whalers found drifting far from any hunting waters. Ships with the tryworks cold, the decks sticky with oil, and not a soul to be found. Cups still on tables. Tools dropped mid-use. Hammocks still swinging. A sense that the crew had stepped away for only a moment and never returned. Some were eventually explained. Disease, perhaps a sudden outbreak of fever that left men too weak to signal for help, drifting until they slipped away one by one. Or storms that washed crews overboard in a single terrifying instant, leaving the ship to sail on without them. But others defied logic. There were rumors of ships found with ropes dangling into the sea, as if the crew had all climbed down, one by one. Or of logbooks that ended mid-sentence. Sky overcast, barometer steady. Preparing to. And nothing more. Superstition filled the gaps. Some believed these ships were cursed, that the sea had claimed their crews in silence, and now the hulls carried their spirits. Sailors swore that when you boarded such a vessel, you could feel it like being watched. The air was heavier. The shadows moved strangely. Even the seagulls kept their distance. Others believed it was the doing of sirens or sea spirits, or the restless souls of men lost at sea returning to claim others. A punishment, perhaps, for killing whales, or for some forgotten sin committed below deck. Occasionally, a derelict would be salvaged, brought back to port, but often they were avoided caught adrift, set ablaze, or left to disappear over the horizon once more. Because some captains preferred to leave ghosts to the sea. The image of a ship, its sails tattered, its deck empty, its wheel turning slowly in the wind, remained one of the most enduring fears among sailors. Not the violence of storms, not the terror of whales, but the slow, quiet vanishing of everything. To sail is to risk being forgotten, and to find a drifting ship is to be reminded that, sometimes, the sea forgets us before we're even gone. Whale ship superstitions, omens, curses, and lucky charms. A whaling ship was a place of order ranks, routines, bells, rules. But beneath that rigid structure lived another kind of order. Older, looser, and far more powerful in the minds of the crew. It was the law of superstition, unwritten, unquestioned, and ever present. These beliefs weren't just quirks. They were survival. When you spent months at sea, hunting creatures larger than your ship, in an ocean that could turn from calm to catastrophic in minutes, signs became a form of control. Small rituals gave shape to fear, and every man aboard a whaling ship knew which signs to heed and which to fear. Never kill an albatross. The rule was absolute. Albatrosses, with their vast wingspans and silent gliding, were seen as the souls of dead sailors watching over their own. To kill one was to invite the wrath of the sea. A sailor from New Bedford once did, and the next day a man was swept from the rigging. The coincidence didn't matter. The meaning was already assigned. No whistling on deck. It was said to summon the wind, and not the good kind. A whistling sailor might bring a squall down on the ship, or worse, change the wind's direction during a crucial maneuver. Even humming could draw a sharp look from the first mate. A green sailor's first catch determines his luck. The first time a new crewman struck a whale, the outcome was everything. If the whale escaped, or if the harpoon bounced off, it was bad luck, not just for the greenhorn, but for the whole crew. Some captains even refused to assign a new man to the first throw, fearing it would curse the voyage. Women aboard brought storms. The sea, in the minds of many sailors, was a jealous mistress. A woman aboard, even as a passenger or disguised sailor, could anger the waves. The belief was so entrenched that women were banned from many whaling ships. The exception? A figurehead. Carved female forms often adorned the prow, with wind-blown hair and arms outstretched, not as a curse, but as a guide, a silent protector. Whale sightings in dreams meant death. More than one sailor woke in the night, pale and sweating, claiming to have seen a whale reaching in his sleep. It wasn't a good sign. Dreams at sea were often filled with water, shadows, motion. But the whale was different. It meant something was coming, something you couldn't escape. Salt spilled in the galley was a bad omen. Just like on land, but at sea worse, salt was precious. Preserved your meat, your hides, your balance. Wasting it, even by accident, meant you were careless and that the sea would notice. Never rename a ship. A renamed vessel was an insult to the sea. The only way to do so without courting disaster was through an elaborate denaming ceremony, where the old name was formally erased from Poseidon's records, preferably involving fire, salt water, and a formal offering over the rail. To counterbalance the dark omens, sailors also carried charms. A lock of hair from a sweetheart, wrapped in oilskin and worn around the neck. A coin placed under the mast before setting sail to buy the ship's safe passage. Tattoos, particularly of anchors, stars, or swallows, etched into skin, not for decoration, but for protection. The swallow, especially, was sacred, a bird that always found its way home. Some believed if a sailor died at sea, the swallow would carry his soul back to land. And then there were the personal rituals. One sailor might always step onto the ship right foot first. Another might never shave before a hunt. Another still might tie a specific knot around his wrist for every whale he'd seen. These weren't shared. These were private magic, grown in silence and guarded fiercely. To outsiders, these beliefs might seem like nonsense. But at sea, where storms could rise from nothing, and the largest creature on earth might rise beside you without warning, these rituals were anchors for the mind. They were a way of saying, if I do this, maybe the sea won't take me today. Compass madness. When the needle lied. There's a kind of terror that only comes when the one thing you rely on absolutely, unquestionably suddenly stops working. For sailors in the 1800s, that thing was the compass. It sat quietly, housed in its wooden box, vesseled in brass, suspended on gimbals to remain level, no matter how the ship pitched. The needle always pointed north. Always. You could sail into a storm, lose sight of the stars, drift through fog for days, but if you had the compass, you still had a direction. It was certainty. It was survival. Until one day, it wasn't. Compass deviation, a term not yet widely understood in the early 1800s, was the phenomenon of a needle slowly drifting from true magnetic north due to local interference. Today, we understand that iron-rich cargo, metal components in the ship, even changes in Earth's magnetic field can skew the needle. But for 19th century sailors, the compass wasn't supposed to change. It was supposed to know. So when the needle began to quiver unnaturally or worse, point somewhere, shouldn't panic set in. Imagine standing on the deck at dawn. The sun is rising, but it's not where the compass says it should be. The stars didn't align with it last night either. At first, you doubt yourself. Perhaps you misread the chart. Perhaps the clouds played tricks on your eyes. But then others notice. The captain frowns. The navigator checks and rechecks. Silence thickens around the box. And now, every decision is uncertain. Are you heading toward land or away from it? Are you sailing into safe waters or into reefs? This is compass madness, not a clinical condition, but a creeping, collective unease. It could unravel an entire crew. Whispers would spread that the ship was cursed, that someone had brought bad luck aboard, that something below was pulling the needle off course, some unseen force in the sea, some mountain of iron buried deep beneath the waves. Some even blamed whales. There were tales, told half seriously, that the great bulls of the deep had metal in their heads, that they could disturb instruments when they drew near. Others swore it was supernatural. A ghost on board, a forgotten burial at sea, a wrong name carved on the prow. There were cases where ships wandered for days, thinking they were heading home, only to find themselves further lost. One whaling log from 1843 tells of a crew that traveled due west for a week, trusting the needle, only to find their position over 400 miles off from their estimate. The stars speak true, the captain wrote in his diary. The compass has lied. Superstition found fertile ground in those moments. Crews reversed course. Compasses were thrown overboard. Rituals performed. Navigators relied once more on the old ways dead reckoning, the sun, the stars. And every eye watched the needle afterward, with attention just short of fear. Even when it worked again, it was no longer trusted. Because once the compass lies, you realize how thin the thread of certainty really is, and how easy it is to drift not just across the water, but in the mind. Phantom islands, lands that moved or disappeared. In the 19th century, sea charts were a mixture of precision and poetry, a world of careful measurements marked with strange uncertainties. Here, a reef. There, a deep trench, and sometimes a speck of land that had never been touched, only seen, or said to be seen. A dot on the map surrounded by nothing but question marks. These were the Phantom Islands. Sailors believed in them because they had no reason not to. You see a shape on the horizon, log it in your journal, and sail on. Perhaps the current carried you away before you could land. Perhaps a fog rolled in, or perhaps it was never there at all. But on the next voyage, the chart bears a name Aurora Island, perhaps, or Saxonburg, or Bermayal, documented in logs, labeled in atlases, discussed in ports, and eventually doubted. Take Sandy Island, for example, a small landmass marked west of New Caledonia, appearing on maps from the early 1800s and believed to exist for nearly 2 centuries. It was recorded by whalers, merchant captains, even naval vessels. But in the 2000s, when modern satellites scanned the area, they found nothing but open ocean. Not a reef, not a sandbar, just absence. A ghost on the chart. Or consider Davis Land, supposedly seen by John Davis in 1687 and reported again by others in the 1700s. It drifted in the minds of navigators for generations, sometimes placed near Antarctica, other times closer to South America. Expeditions went searching for it. None returned with proof. In the 1800s, such islands were often the product of mirages, superior mirages, or fata morgana, where light bends over the ocean and distant objects, even clouds, rise and stretch into shapes resembling cliffs or coastlines. A bank of fog might appear as a white beach. A cluster of sea ice might seem like rocky terrain. And yet, once logged, these islands gained a kind of half-life. They existed not in the sea, but in the shared imagination of seafarers. Captains planned routes around them. Charts bore their names for decades. Maps from the period are dotted with tiny gray patches, some labeled Island Doubtful. Others, simply gone, but there's something deeper here. Something about why sailors believed. To a man afloat in an endless ocean, the sight of land even imagined was powerful. It offered rest, rescue, possibility. And so when someone said they saw land, the hope was too strong to discard. Disbelief on the open sea could be fatal, but belief could keep you rowing. There were darker tales, 2 stories of islands that appeared in one voyage and vanished on the next, of ships that anchored near shores never found again. Some said these islands were cursed. Others called them the hiding lands, places that moved or sank or concealed themselves from the unworthy. And so phantom islands endured, not because they were real, but because, in the vast loneliness of the sea, even imagined land was better than none at all. Bioluminescent waters, the sea that lit up by itself. There are nights at sea when the water seems to forget it is water, when every ripple, every oar stroke, every swell of the ship's bow glows with a cold blue-green light. The sea illuminates itself, and no lantern is needed to see. It glows not from above, but from within. To sailors of the 19th century, this was not science. It was magic. Bioluminescence, though they didn't have the word for it, was a phenomenon that most long-haul sailors would encounter at least once in their lives. And yet, each time, it felt new, unnatural, holy, or cursed. It appeared suddenly, like a veil lifting in the night. The ocean would glow as if lit from beneath by starlight, trapped in its depths. The causes, as we now understand, were microscopic. Dinoflagellates, tiny plankton that react to motion, release a flash of light when disturbed. But aboard a whale ship in the 1800s, these lights were called by many names: sea spirits, ocean fire, the wake of souls. Imagine standing on the deck during a moonless night. The sky is black velvet, pricked with stars, but the sea ... The sea glows. As the ship cuts through the water, its bow throws off glowing spray. The wake behind is a burning ribbon, stretching back into darkness. When a wave breaks, it pulses with light, like thunder with no sound. Even the dolphins, if they surface, trail halos around them as they leap like underwater comets. Men wrote about it in their journals. Some tried to capture it in ink-scribbled sketches of glowing crests and bright eddies. Most simply described it as the water on fire. Some feared it. They believed it was a sign of something unnatural, a storm coming, or death nearby. One captain noted that on the night before a sailor was swept overboard, the entire bay around the ship glowed, as if the sea itself were trying to speak. Superstitions quickly formed. Don't reach into it. Don't stare too long. Don't name it aloud. Others revered it. They said it was the sea's soul showing itself, that it only glowed when it was calm-pleased even. Some old hands claimed it marked the presence of whales nearby, drawn by the glowing water. Whether true or not, the association stuck. Sometimes, after processing a whale, the decks would be rinsed with seawater, normally a grim and dirty task. But on certain nights, the rinse water would shimmer as it flowed over the planks, lighting the blood-stained deck with ghostly radiance. The effect unsettled many. One sailor wrote, "It was as if the whale itself were still watching us, shining its anger across our boots." In rare cases, the glow was so intense that men could read by it. A few tried to collect the water in buckets, but the glow faded when stilled. It existed only in motion light that needed chaos to exist. A metaphor, perhaps, for the sea itself. And in those quiet moments, surrounded by an ocean lit from within, every man aboard a whale ship felt a strange humility. The sea didn't need the sun to shine. It didn't need permission to be beautiful or terrifying. It was alive in ways they didn't understand. It held mysteries that could not be mapped, measured, or harpooned. So they watched, and they wondered. Life of the ship owner, the men who made fortunes from danger comfortable ashore. the firelit parlors of the investors. While the men aboard whaling ships labored in freezing winds, rowed toward creatures the size of cottages, and slept inches from vermin and pitch-stained hammocks, a different kind of life unfolded far from the spray and salt. It began in places like Nantucket, New Bedford, and Salem port towns, where salt air mingled with money, and where the business of whaling turned from physical risk into ledgers, contracts, and quiet wealth. Here, in large wood-framed homes with white shutters and creaking floorboards, polished by generations of careful servants, the ship owners sat by firelight, sipping brandy from cut crystal glasses. They didn't wear oil-streaked coats or boots soaked in brine. Their coats were made of wool, pressed and smelling faintly of lavender. Their rooms were warm even in winter, heated by fireplaces that hissed and cracked with the steady rhythm of comfort. These men were not sailors. Some had never been to sea, but they knew the business intimately, the costs of outfitting a vessel, the wages of a green hand versus a harpooner, the value of a barrel of oil in Boston compared to London or Havana. On shelves behind them stood ledgers, thick with handwritten entries detailing voyages past, profits earned, shares distributed. A quill dipped in ink was their only weapon, yet it secured more wealth than the strongest arm at sea. They did not shout over crashing waves. They discussed contracts by candlelight. A voyage was, to them, an investment portfolio. Evenings might be spent entertaining other merchants, local politicians, or family friends. Piano music in the parlor, the clink of glass on china, a warm supper laid out on linen, as news from the Pacific News of storms, whales, and death arrived days or weeks late, folded in salt-stiff envelopes carried by wind-powered packet ships. Yet they knew the stakes. Many ship owners had once been whalers themselves. They had lost fingers to cold, seen men drown, and had stared into the eye of a breaching whale. But they had risen through luck, marriage, shrewd dealings, or sheer endurance, and now sat in chairs that didn't rock with the sea. But the sea was never far. Sometimes, late at night, they'd climb the Widow's Walk atop their homes, a narrow railing-ringed platform built specifically to watch the horizon. Wives and mothers used it, watching for sails, hoping for safe returns. But the owners, too, climbed those steps, sometimes alone, looking not just for loved ones, but for ships, their investments, their risks on the water, hopefully returning in full sail, heavy with oil and profit. In a sense, they dreamed with the same desperation as their crews-only and softer sheets. They slept in quiet rooms, not rocked by waves, but by flickering lamplight and the hum of the hearth. But even there, the sea echoed faintly, in the maps hung on the walls, in the teeth of whales mounted like trophies, in the silence between letters, because while they weren't on board, their fortunes were. And in the world of 19th-century whaling, comfort ashore was always haunted by risk at sea. Paperwork and profit, managing risk from afar, far from the creaking masts and salt-drenched decks, in study rooms lined with dark wood and glass-fronted cabinets, the real machinery of whaling turned quietly. No blubber boiled here, no harpoons sang through the air, but still the numbers flowed, and the decisions made in these quiet spaces determined the shape of every voyage. At the center of this world sat the ship owner's paperwork, the lifeblood of the industry on land. Stacked in neat piles or bound in worn leather ledgers, these documents represented men, whales, barrels, and months at sea, all flattened into lines of ink and calculation. To the ship owner, the voyage began not with sails, but with signatures. Outfitting a ship was no simple matter. Every nail, barrel, cask of salted pork, length of rope, and scrap of sailcloth was tallied and ordered. Lists were drawn up and prices negotiated. A ship might require hundreds of specific items, from medicine chests to extra harpoons, from prayer books to casks of drinking water. All of it was noted, recorded, and double-checked by clerks in long aprons and ink-stained sleeves. Next came cruise shares, a unique compensation model where most men aboard the vessel were not paid a fixed wage, but a lay, or a portion of the profits from the oil brought back. The owner and captain determined each man's lay in advance, recording the figures in formal agreements. A captain might earn 1/7 of the total profits, a harpooner 1/20th, a green hand perhaps only 1/200th. The contracts were cold, specific, and often cruel. Every number had meaning. Every lay had consequences. Insurance had to be purchased. Whaling was a dangerous trade, and maritime insurers calculated their own risks before agreeing to back a vessel. Premiums were higher for longer voyages, for less experienced captains, for ships that sailed too close to ice or to unfamiliar grounds. These figures were added to the owner's books and sometimes quietly passed down to the crew through reduced lays. Even the whales themselves became entries. Ship owners tracked past hauls, noting which regions had yielded the most oil, which seasons brought the best catch. A well-run office in New Bedford might keep 20 years of log summaries, mapping the slow, bloody migration of sperm whales across the Pacific. The animals were not seen as mysteries, but as moving columns in a ledger. Every success meant profit. A full haul of whale oil could make a ship worth 10 times its outfitting cost, and the owner, having fronted the cost of goods, food, tools, and salaries, took the largest share. When a ship returned, wagons lined the dock, barrels were rolled to shore, and the oil was sold, weighed, stored, and sold again sometimes across oceans. But failure meant ruin. A ship lost at sea was not just a human tragedy. It was a financial collapse. Letters would be sent. Claims would be filed. Contracts re-examined. Invoices disputed. The same men who toasted to success one season might be scraping together funds to outfit another vessel the next. And through it all, the paperwork continued. Meticulous, quiet, and tireless, it formed the spine of the industry. While sailors faced the elements, ship owners faced accounts, and in their world, a spilled barrel was no less a disaster than a broken mast. Because risk, for them, wasn't just distant, it was measurable, trackable, something to be balanced in the books and filed in a drawer. And yet, every signature they penned, every deal they struck, sent another ship into the great uncertainty. Another gamble on wind, whale, and fate, recruiting the desperate, how the poor staffed the fleet. Beneath the gilded ledgers and polished boots of the ship owners lay the true foundation of the whaling industry: desperation. Every voyage required bodies, strong backs, steady hands, and men willing to endure months or years of danger for uncertain pay. And time after time, they were found in the alleys, docks, and back rooms of port towns, not from bold adventurers, but from the poor, the drifting, and the cornered. Recruitment didn't happen in grand halls. It happened in taverns, boarding houses, and waterfront alleys, where recruiters known as shipping agents or crimps worked their trade. They kept an ear out for anyone complaining of hunger, homelessness, or bad luck. A single word, out of work, was an invitation. A crimp would sidle up, a friendly drink in hand, and begin the pitch. You ever been to sea? It's a hard life, but to pay when you come back, you'll be a rich man. They're sailing tomorrow. No waiting. You can sign tonight. The promises were often hollow, but to a man who hadn't eaten in days, who owed rent, who had no family, they sounded like rescue. What they didn't always know was that the first drink they accepted might be added to their debt, to be subtracted from their future lay. By morning, they'd signed on to a ship they hadn't seen, bound for an ocean they'd never known. The fleet needed men, not resumes. Experience was a bonus, not a requirement. Strong arms, youth, and desperation were the primary qualifications. And so the crews were often a patchwork of immigrants, runaways, former farmers, drifters, sailors pressed from merchant ships, and boys barely old enough to shave. Some were promised adventure. Others were given no choice. In some ports, especially in the Pacific Islands or South America, ship owners and captains recruited locals to fill empty berths, offering them trinkets, clothing, or simple pay in return for hard labor. These men were often underpaid, mistreated, and rarely given favorable lays. They were there to fill the gap, not to rise through the ranks. The lay system, the method by which pay was tied to the success of the voyage, ensured that the financial risk fell not on the owner, but on the crew. If the ship returned with little oil, the owner still had his cut. The crew might return with less than they'd borrowed, ending the voyage poorer than they had begun. In some tragic cases, men returned home in rags years older, scarred by storms and work, and deeply in debt. To ensure compliance, captains were given near total authority. A sailor who refused orders could be flogged. A complaint could be ignored. And any man who deserted was hunted down or blacklisted from future ships. The deck of a whaling vessel was not a democracy. It was a floating workplace where pain and obedience were standard tools of management. Still, some volunteered willingly, believing they'd rise through the ranks. And a few did, moving from green hand to boat steerer, and eventually to officer. But these were the exceptions. Most were forgotten, lost to the logbooks, buried at sea, or simply broken by the voyage, returning home quieter, thinner, and unwilling to speak much about it. It was the poor who made the fleet possible. The nameless hands who turned the winches, pulled the oars, gutted the whales. They were the invisible machinery behind the oil that lit the parlors of the elite. And their recruitment was not so much an invitation as it was an escape route with no promise of what lay on the other side. Reading the logs, watching whales turn into numbers. For the ship owners who stayed ashore, the whaling voyage was not a tale of danger or adventure. It was a ledger waiting to be filled, and the instrument of that transformation, the heart of the business, was the logbook. Every whaling ship carried one. Bound in thick leather or plain wood, it was kept dry and safe in the cabin, away from salt spray and careless hands. Its pages, lined and stiff, were filled by the captain or designated officer, whose neat handwriting captured the voyage not in stories, but in quantities, dates, and decisions. Where the sailor saw a whale, the owner saw a figure. A typical log entry might read, July 19th, sighted pod off port bow, lowered boats. 2 struck, 1 escaped, 1 taken. Yield, 75 barrels. Latitude, 3S. Weather, squally, moderate sea. There was no poetry, no scent of salt air or scream of gulls. Just events recorded with precision. The number of barrels was the headline. The rest was footnote. When the ship returned months or years later, this logbook was one of the first things brought ashore, sometimes before the crew even disembarked. A young clerk would carry it up to the office, where the owner or his secretary would open it carefully, page by page, tracing the voyage like a financial autopsy. Each whale struck and lost was a red mark. Each storm delay, an inefficiency. Each dead crewman, a replacement cost. Each barrel secured, a small victory. These logs were not just records, they were tools. A wise ship owner would compare logs from multiple voyages, building up an intimate understanding of where whales gathered, how long each hunt took, which captains were efficient, and which wasted time or equipment. If a ship consistently returned underfilled, the captain might be quietly retired or pressured to take more risks. If a particular region yielded high numbers, the next vessel might be sent that way, even if the route was longer or more dangerous. It was all a matter of margins. Some ship owners, especially the ambitious ones, developed elaborate tables and charts in private tracking the migration of whales, seasonal shifts, and crew performance. The whales themselves became entries in a database of oil potential. Their lives, their battles, their size, their strength, reduced to barrels rendered. There was a strange kind of detachment in it all. To the owner, a whale was never seen leaping in spray, never heard groaning beneath the blade, never smelled as it boiled on deck. It was never a creature. It was a number, an expected yield, a return on investment. And when the yield was high, the logbook would end with a flourish. Voyage successful. 1,100 barrels returned. Crew healthy. Only 2 lost. Only 2. Their names might not be noted. Their stories, if they had any, were left out. The log wasn't for them. It was for the business, for the shareholders, for the quiet calculations made by men whose hands had never touched harpoon rope. To the ship owner, the logbook was the ocean made legible, a sea of numbers that told whether fortune had smiled, or whether the next voyage would need stricter oversight and tighter purses. The club of whaling tycoons, luxury fueled by blood and oil. In the polished parlors and drawing rooms of Nantucket, New Bedford, and Salem, there existed a quiet but potent circle of men, the whaling tycoons. They were not aristocrats by birth, nor captains by experience. Yet they controlled fleets, shaped trade routes, and dined with senators. Their empire smelled not of incense or spice, but of oil. Whale oil. It fueled their lamps, their fortunes, and their egos. They met in gentlemen's clubs, discreet establishments with thick carpets, brandy decanters always half full, and maps pinned to the walls like silent trophies. Here, they didn't speak of blood or blubber. They spoke of markets, of margins, of which refinery had just opened in Liverpool, or how many barrels London would pay for this quarter. It was a conversation in quiet voices, but every word carried weight. This was a tight-knit world. Many of the owners were related through marriage, through business partnerships, through generations of shared risk. A man might be the cousin of one captain, the brother-in-law of another, and the silent investor in 3 ships docked 2 ports away. Their fortunes were interwoven, and so too were their lives. And with fortune came luxury, a luxury born directly from the suffering of others. Their homes were grand, but not ostentatious. Painted white, built of timber, with wide porches and tall windows. Inside, however, was where the real wealth showed. Imported carpets, silver tea sets from England, curtains made of silk brought clipper ships returning from China. They hosted lavish dinners, where guests dined beneath oil lamps lit by the very substance harvested from the Pacific's darkest waters. The irony was never mentioned. It didn't need to be. Oil was everywhere in their lamps, their profits, their wives' corsets, their children's school books. Their wives wore whalebone corsets, stiffened with the remains of the very animals their husbands hunted. Their mirrors were framed in ivory, their brushes in baleen. The labor of countless nameless sailors passed through their hands every day, yet remained invisible. It was just part of the decor. The club was not just social, it was strategic. Here, alliances were made, captains chosen, risks divided. If one man's ship was overdue, another might offer a loan. If the market turned sour, they could collude to delay a shipment, drive prices back up. They were not cruel men, not in their own eyes. They believed in order, in commerce, in the rules of the game. If sailors signed bad lays, that was the market. If whales were driven to near extinction, that was progress. And if oil prices dipped, well, perhaps the ships would sail a little farther next time, push a little harder. Many gave to charity, funded schools, built churches, but always with names etched in stone, a reminder that their wealth had done more than light lamps. It had built legacy. And yet, beneath it all, their empire rested on 2 things: the suffering of men and the death of whales. And in the stillest hours of night, when the fire had died low and the wind rattled the shutters, some of them maybe heard the echo of oars, the slap of tail on water, or the ghostly creak of a ship that never came home. But then morning came, and the club reopened. and the ledgers were ready once more. Politics and protection. Government help for their interests. Behind every harpoon that pierced a whale's hide, there stood more than just the man who threw it. Behind him stood the captain, the ship owner, the merchants who sold the oil, and beyond them, the machinery of government, quietly ensuring that the wheels of whaling turned smoothly and profitably. In the 19th century, whaling wasn't just business, it was geopolitics. It was industry, energy, commerce, and national pride, bundled into barrels and shipped around the world. And the men who ran it knew that if they wanted to safeguard their fortunes, they needed more than good ships. They needed influence. The most powerful ship owners were not merely businessmen, they were political players. They corresponded with congressmen, lobbied for favorable tariffs, and supported candidates sympathetic to maritime interests. Letters were sent, dinners were hosted, quiet agreements were made in back rooms, sealed with handshakes and port wine. They advocated for naval protection, especially as American whaling ships pushed farther into Pacific waters, operating thousands of miles from home. Pirates, privateers, and rival national fleets posed constant threats. So owners petitioned the government for naval escorts, for treaties with Pacific Islanders, for the construction of coal stations abroad. And often, they got them. In return, the government received more than just political support. Whaling was a source of national revenue. Taxes on exports, customs duties, shipbuilding contracts, these fed into federal coffers. The industry employed thousands and contributed to the economic pulse of key port cities. Protecting it wasn't just a favor, it was policy. Owners also pushed for legal protections. Maritime law evolved, often in their favor. Rules around ownership, salvage rights, and liability were refined to shield investors from excessive loss. If a ship sank, insurance could soften the blow. If a sailor died, compensation was minimal, standardized, and rarely challenged. Sailors, by contrast, had few advocates. Most were illiterate, transient, or foreign-born. Their complaints rarely reached anyone who could help. When mutinies occurred or captains were accused of cruelty, hearings were held, but rarely did anything come of them. Ship owners, after all, chose the captains. And judges often dined at the same clubs. Even education and propaganda played a role. In newspapers and pamphlets, whaling was framed not as brutality, but as adventure, enterprise, manhood. The public was shown the lamp, not the deck, the warm parlor, not the boiling blubber. And when criticism arose from early conservationists, or from religious groups alarmed at sailor treatment, it was quickly answered by the industry's defenders. Whaling, they argued, was a civilizing force. It brought oil to light homes, enabled education, and drove the economy forward. What could be nobler? Of course, not all owners were cynical. Some believed in the promise of the trade, saw themselves as builders of empire, stewards of national power. But the machinery they helped build of subsidies, silence, and selective visibility served profit above all. So while the ships sailed out to sea, the owners stayed ashore, steady hands behind the curtain, shaping policy, managing image, and making sure that danger always turned, somehow, into dividends. Whalebone corsets and oil lamps. Everyday luxury from death. In the flickering warmth of 19th century parlors and dressing rooms, most people never gave much thought to the whale. And yet, the whale was there, in the shadows, in the seams, in the light itself. To the ship owners and their families, the bounty of the sea surrounded them in subtle ways. Their homes, wardrobes, and daily comforts were inlaid with the remnants of creatures that had once filled the oceans, hunted down, flensed, and rendered into use. It was a world made soft and bright by the silent labor of sailors and the silent death of whales. Start in the dressing room, where a lady of means might be assisted by a maid in tightening her corset. The stiff, bending support inside? It was whalebone, not bone in the traditional sense, but baleen, the flexible filtering plates found in the mouths of certain whale species. When boiled, dried, and cut into strips, baleen became fashion's hidden skeleton. It was the foundation of posture, elegance, and control. In corsets, in hoops for petticoats, even in umbrella ribs and parasol spines. Women moved through drawing rooms shaped by the sea, though most never knew it. The smooth feel of the baleen and the back of their gowns so pliant, so firm, was once part of a mouth that filtered krill in Antarctic waters. That mouth, now vanished, had helped define high society. And then there was light. Whale oil lit the lamps that stood on every mantel, every desk, every dining table. It burned with a steady, smokeless flame, far superior to earlier animal fats. The glow was soft, golden, and oddly comforting. But the smell lingered subtle, metallic, faintly sweet. If you knew it, you could detect it even behind rosewater and lavender. A gentleman reading the paper at dusk might adjust the wick of his whale oil lamp without thinking. A mother might rock her child to sleep beside a flame fed by a creature that once swam beneath polar stars. The firelight flickered across the oil-painted faces of ancestors on the wall, unaware, uncaring that the lamp below them bore the warmth of a death at sea. Even household goods bore the mark of the whale. Baleen brushes, oil-polished wood, ivory and bone inlays. Scrimshaw delicately carved whale teeth became both art and memory, souvenirs brought home by sailors who had no money, only skill and time. The presence of whale in these homes was invisible but constant. It was folded into comfort, rendered into elegance, reduced until it was background. And because of this, few thought to question it. Few wondered what the process looked like, what it meant to chase a whale for days, to pierce its body with barbed steel, to saw it open on a rolling deck, to boil its parts in cauldrons while the stench clung to everything. Those details stayed at sea. What arrived on land was refined, repurposed, and rebranded. It was easy to love a corset, easy to admire the flame of a lamp, harder to love the hands that rendered the oil, harder still to grieve the beast that provided it. The home was the endpoint of a long, brutal chain, and by the time the oil reached the table, or the baleen was sewn into a gown, the suffering had been polished away, turned into softness, into silence, into civilization. Denying the dangers, letters from sea that were ignored. The ocean, in all its vast and indifferent power, sent back letters. Folded, smudged, and inked with trembling hands, these were the voices of men at sea sailors writing home, captains making reports, and mates scribbling complaints in stiff candlelight. But many of those letters never made it far. And even when they did, the world they returned to often refused to hear them. In the offices of ship owners, in the drawing rooms of investors, in the social clubs where fortunes were toasted and trade routes discussed, letters from sea were read and then quietly dismissed. A crewman might write of frostbite, of men falling from rigging in violent storms, of fights erupting over rotten food or unfair treatment. He might describe the dead washed overboard, lost to illness, or buried in the boiling blubber of the tryworks. These were not formal complaints, just confessions, just truth on paper. A captain might plead for better supplies, better men, or better shares for his officers. He might document morale, failing after months of fruitless hunting. He might explain why a voyage that was meant to last 2 years had dragged into 3, with men starving, half-mad, and mutinous. And still, the responses were polite but cold. Thank you for the update. We shall review your suggestions for the next voyage. Regretfully, we must uphold the agreed lay. The truth was known, but it was inconvenient. It disrupted the flow of business. Even wives and families who received letters from sailors detailing the cruel monotony, the punishments, the illnesses could do little. What power did they have against a system backed by wealth and protected by law? The letters became background noise in the world of those who profited, glimpses into hardship that could be compartmentalized, rationalized, or just buried in drawers. Some letters never even reached shore. Ships went down. Carriers were lost. Messages drifted in bottles for years, sometimes decades, washing ashore in places the sender had never seen in life. Time and tide carried their words, but not their pleas. And some men, having returned from sea, chose never to write at all. They had written once, twice, maybe 3 times, and nothing had changed. Their words, they realized, were not a part of the business. They were not inputs into the profit. They were reminders that the oil had a price, that the corset and lamp were bought with blood. And so they stopped. They went quiet, or they spoke only to each other in bars and alleys, away from the comfort of those who lit their parlors with oil and straightened their backs with baleen. In the world of whaling, the greatest silence wasn't on the sea, it was on land, where the dangers were known, but never named, where the letters were opened, skinned, and then folded back up, filed away, forgotten, ending an era when the world moved on without them. It didn't happen all at once. No storm toppled the industry. No single event ended the age of oil lamps and harpoon dreams. Instead, the whaling empire that had once stretched across oceans and bankrolled entire towns began to erode in slow, quiet silence, like a ship left at anchor too long, its hull rotting just beneath the surface. By the mid to late 19th century, the world was changing, and it no longer needed the whale. The first blow came from beneath the ground, not the sea: petroleum. In Pennsylvania, in 1859, a well struck oil, not the kind that screamed and swam, but the kind that sat deep in the earth, waiting to be pumped. It could be refined more easily, transported more cheaply, and burned just as cleanly as whale oil. And it didn't fight back. At first, the whaling tycoons dismissed it. Crude oil is for farmers in Greece, but prices shifted. Lamp makers adapted. And before long, families who once lit their parlors with whale oil switched to kerosene. It was faster. It was safer. It was cheaper. The fashion industry changed, too. Whalebone corsets gave way to steel stays, then to looser garments altogether. The Victorian silhouette softened, and with it, the market for baleen collapsed. Umbrellas were made with wire. Brush handles, once carved from bone or ivory, were turned out of molded plastic. Even the ships themselves began to vanish. Steam replaced sails. Iron replaced timber. The ports once filled with tall masts and tryworks emptied out. Boatyards went quiet. Chandlers shut their doors. And yet, many of the ship owners resisted the change. They invested in more ships, sent them farther, for longer, chasing dwindling pods across an increasingly empty ocean. They blamed poor captains, bad luck, anything but the truth. The era was ending. Towns that had once thrived on the trade began to hollow out. Whaling museums were founded not to celebrate a living industry, but to preserve the ghost of one. Schools that had once trained navigators and harpooners began teaching business and trade instead. Sons no longer followed fathers to sea. They sought factories, shops, or cities. A few ship owners adapted. They turned to railroads, textiles, shipping, real estate. They folded their profits into quieter empires, built on land and less soaked in salt. Their grand houses remained, but the smell of oil no longer lingered at the edges. Others faded entirely. Their wealth tied to ships that no longer sailed. Their papers worth less each passing year. They watched as the world turned the page. In time, even the memory softened. Children grew up not knowing the creak of rigging or the grind of a mincing knife. They saw whale oil only in dusty lamps, corsets only in costume dramas, scrimshaw only in museum cases. The age of whaling had ended not with fury, but with forgetting. And yet, somewhere in the silence, between flickers of firelight In the pages of old logbooks, the echoes remain. Of oars striking water, of blubber boiling, of men shouting in the cold, of profit, pain, and persistence, rolling endlessly on waves long gone still. Drifting toward silence. And now, as the lamps burn low and the sea falls still, let your mind drift gently away from the decks and shadows of the wailing ship. Let the echoes of oars fade, the flicker of the tryworks dim, and the press of salt against your skin dissolve into calm. You've walked among the weary, the soaked, the hungry. You've slept in damp hammocks and chewed tasteless meals while the sea rolled endlessly beneath your feet. You've watched a hunt unfold, not from the thrill of the strike, but from the strain in the rope, the toll on the men, and the smoke of boiling oil. And you've stepped ashore again, not into triumph, but into the quiet parlors where profit masked pain and light was bought with lives. You've seen how comfort is built on distance, how letters were read but not answered, and how even empire fades when the world decides to turn the page. That time is gone now. The ships are long returned or long lost, their names weathered away by wind and time. The oceans are quieter, now not empty, but changed. Whales still pass beneath the surface, but no longer chased by sails. You're safe now. The sea is far behind you. The smell of oil and brine is only memory. The groaning of timbers, the slap of waves, the cries from the crow's nest, these belong to another world. Let them fade. Let your breath steady like a calm tide. Rest now in the stillness that the sailors never had. The voyage is over. The ship has gone quiet, and you may finally sleep